I've been an L2 since 2017 and a certified judge a year before that. Unless we have to go back and fix things, I'd like to do some thank yous. I'd like to thank all of our Sphere, Coaching Sphere project team, Michael, Jurgen, Sashi, and Klaus, and also helping me in the back today, Ben in the Ral Zarek chat room. Additionally, I'd like to thank all the current and future sponsors of this judge conference, many of which are making this possible while Paper Magic is on pause. And then, of course, I want to thank you for attending and pre-authorize every one of you listening to give me your sharpest feedback at the end of the presentation. So as you follow the presentation, as you follow the presentation to hopefully gain some extra wisdom or skills, keep a part of your mind open to find the points of praise and, of course, polish that you want to share with me. And I want to start by saying that when it comes to doing backups, it's a little bit like time travel. So throughout the day, I might refer to you as friends, judges, and time travelers. And if you know the tropes of time travel, there can be some real dangers ahead, right? And because of that, we have a number of positions out there that you can find within the judge community, who I will try to speak a little more slowly to hopefully give the upload a better chance to catch up. A lot of judges will be very hesitant to do backups, and that's okay, because the baseline position is don't back up unless it's substantially better. With that in mind, if you'd like to go deeper and know more, say judge in the chat room and we'll get started. Excellent. Excellent. Oh, all the judge calls. We're all turning our heads automatically. We're all wondering who's closest to the call. And with that in mind, we have some objectives for today. Our first objective is to go ahead and identify the 3 W's of a backup. These will be 3 words that all start with the letter W that we will want to know about in order to decide not only if, but how to ultimately conduct our backups. Then second, we're going to discuss case study examples and ask the backup or not question to each and every person. That question will come on your screen and look a lot like this when the time comes for that objective. You can just tap right on the emojis at the bottom and it will record your vote. Our third objective is to role play getting a backup approved, and I'll be especially looking for a fast typer in the chat room to role play with me when that comes up. And then fourth, we will explore some bonus situations if time permits. So let's jump into objective number 1, the 3 W's of backup, where we can back up according to our policy documents. We're going to look at who can authorize a backup. And finally, what is backing up in detail? Like, what is the actual process that we engage in? So, who can type into my chat room any one or all of the 3 infractions that players might commit that allow us to conduct a backup according to policy? We've had one answer from our L2 judge in Russia saying a GRV. That's been agreed to in Indonesia. We've got a different answer coming out of France, a communication policy violation, or CPV. Both of those are confirmed by our Brazilian judges, I believe, and Indonesia is agreeing with CPV. And we've got from Indonesia and from Italy simultaneously coming in a third answer of HCE. Let's see how that matches. Absolutely correct across the board. HCE, according to the Infraction Procedure Guide segment 2.3, allows us to do a simple backup in order to recreate a set so that we can then do the rest of our hidden card error fix appropriately. In the IPG section 2.5 under game rules violation, backups are one of our tools that we can use to fix a game. And then finally, in the IPG under communication policy violations, on 3.7 of the IPG, we have some instructions that also authorize us to do a backup. Now, of course, understand that just because we're authorized to do a backup doesn't mean we automatically do. It is just a tool in our toolbox. Uh, Here's something else that you may or may not have been aware. Backups are tools that are available to us at regular. So backups also occur in the jar. And what this means is for every judge, friend, and time traveler listening right now, this is useful information to you. Even if you've not yet had a chance or are looking for your first chances to judge at a competitive rules enforcement level, you can practice the skills that you'll be gaining and experiencing today, even at regular. So that's great news. And then there's actually one other way that a backup can be authorized, and it's not by a player error. It's actually on those rare occasions, right, when we have a judge error. So if a judge gave a ruling on which players relied, and you do a sanity check, or someone follows up and asks a key question, and you realize, oops, I made a mistake. That's all. Mistakes are part of growing up, right? Then you have a chance to stop that match and rewind it to the point where your judge ruling was relied upon. But of course, just like with every backup, if it would be more detrimental to the game or add a whole lot of uncertainty to the way that the future play patterns move forward, minus the correction of the error, then we're probably going to leave the game as it is. And that leads us to W number 2. Who can authorize a backup? According to our Magic Tournament rules document, you go ahead and type some answers in the chat room. I will say that the question marks may or may not be misleading. I see a lot of answers coming we've got an L1 saying the head judge, we've got an L1 in Uruguay saying head judge, we've got our L2s from Indonesia, Brazil saying the head judge. I love all of these answers. And then we've got some interesting ones here. We've got an L2 out of Brazil saying team leads. And then we've got out of Russia saying appeals judges, or what some might refer to as burgundies in some plant. And then we've got one of our back office support members saying L3s. Well, interestingly, the IPG or the MTR specifically says the head judge can, but it also says that the head judge can delegate these responsibilities. So it is the head judge who is authorized and anybody to whom they delegate that. And it is often to team leads, L3s, burgundies, appeals judges. And in some events that you may have the opportunity to head judge, you could even give it to experienced L2s, or just ask people to kind of sanity check one another. So it is the head judge and whomever the head judge authorizes. You folk are absolutely knocking these questions out of the park. I am so excited. So let's look at number W3. What is a backup? How exactly do we do it from a process-oriented standpoint? Well, first off, a backup is a method of last resort. This is a tool that we are going to bring out when leaving the game in its current state with the error that's been made is significantly worse. Or if you prefer, going back and fixing that error before it happens is significantly better than if we let things be the way they are. It is a system of going back through all the actions. I really like what my L2 from Russia is saying here. We're going to revert these actions one by one, and I would add one key word. We're going to do it precisely in a reverse chronological order. The last action taken is going to be the first action we undo. And we're going to continue to undo those actions. This could mean taking cards out of the graveyard, putting it back on the stack. It could be taking that card on the stack, putting it back into the hand. And it even could be in a circumstance where a player, say, drew a card, finding a random card out of their hand and putting it on the top of the library. Now, while I did say that the what of a backup is reversing every one of those actions in reverse chronicle order, there actually is one exception. If you think you know what the one exception is, go ahead and type it. This is a pretty obscure one, but I'm going to give anybody who does type a little chance to write that one exception. This is something that could happen even multiple times, but we're not going to do it. There we go. We got it from the Netherlands. Thank you, my L2 from the Netherlands. Yeah, if there were multiple shuffle effects of a single deck or both decks, we're going to do one shuffle at the end of all of our actions. So it's both not necessarily in chronological order, and we won't do it every time. And this just makes sense, right? Because ultimately random is random. And if we sit around and randomize through each sub action of our rewind, we may be taking some excessive time just shuffling decks. So that's what our backup is, and those are our 3 W's. So let's go on to objective number 2. We're going to discuss some case study examples to backup or not. And before I move there, I just want to use my own backup or not question. And I want to say yes, we back up if you're all hearing me well, and say don't back up if you're getting any breakup, just so I'm kind of aware of where we're at. Oh, this is such good news with the audio. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your full participation, too. So here we go. This is our learning by doing or not doing. Active player casts Phyrexian Unlife. So we're in the old modern meta, back when you could play this deck. And we're going to cast Phyrexian Unlife, and the active player says, does it resolve? Well, the non-active player goes, I'd like to respond by casting Cryptic Command. And I'm going to choose the following modes. I'm going to choose counter the target spell. I'm going to target that Phyrexian Unlife on the stack, and I'd like to draw a card. They tap their lands, and the active player goes, okay, puts the Phyrexian Unlife in their graveyard, plays a scry land, scries to the bottom, and passes their turn. At that point, active player says pass turn, and the non-active player, who's now really the active player, right, goes to untap their lands, and the first one they untap is a Scalding Tarn. And they go, uh-oh, judge, right? They call for you, you come, you do a investigation in this classic situation, and you find that there was no cheating through your investigation strategies. Let's see. Yes, non-active player did draw. They didn't forget to draw. I thank you for mentioning that. The spell fully resolved. I only talked about what the active player did, but yes, non-active player did draw. Great question from the L2 in Russia. And at this point, we're going to ask the question about, do we back up or don't we? Feel free to vote now. Okay, wow, look at this. We're getting very one-sided votes here. There you go. We've got a fantastic question from a UK L3. Can I vote no more than once? And there's an agreement from I think Brazil. I think that might be Brazil. If it's a different country, let me know, please. Our L1. Yes, you've done so very well. This is the classic no backup situation. For those who are wondering why, it's because we've had a draw effect. And if we go back to correct things, what's going to have to happen to that Scalding Tarn, right? That Scalding Tarn is going to have to be sacrificed, and then we're going to search for a land. Yeah, I mean, it's in the deck. That's not that's not the issue. The issue is that after we search and put that land into play, we're going to shuffle. So think about what happens with our backup if we did one. And I think we're all pretty much, yeah, we're unanimously in agreement not to do a backup here. We would be putting a random card on top of their library. Well, a couple of things are going to happen. We're either by chance going to put a card up there that was like a dead card in their hand or didn't matter, or we might be putting into that into the top of their library their very best card in their hand that they're really hoping to play next turn. And the mere fact that they have that knowledge about what's on top of their library may influence what their play decision is. In other words, that warning we had of in a perfect world, when we do a backup or a rewind, the game plays forward from that point on without any real deviations or new decision trees. Um, and we really, in a sense, have two decision trees, right? One is overlookable, and that is Cryptic Command does have multiple modes, and they could choose new modes, right? And we're mostly okay with that because they had that option that's sort of built in, that's sort of baked into the card. But the real problem here is that random card going to the top and this either significant advantage that it could play or the significant encouragement of a different line of play. So I like everyone's answer here. Let's go on to our next example. Here's our learning by doing or not doing. I'll go ahead and actually put up the quiz now so you can answer as soon as you feel comfortable, but I will let you know when the full scenario is there, and that's when the light bulb person is pointing in the sky. So active player says Master of Ethereum. So we're playing again back when you could play Affinity. Rest in peace, Mox Opal, everyone. Non-active player goes respond. I'd like to cast Cryptic Command. I want to counter that spell that's on the stack and tap your team. And then active player goes ahead and puts that in the graveyard, taps all their critters, and says effectively pass turn. Non-active player goes to untap. First land they untap, they realize it's actually a fetch land here and goes, uh-oh, and calls for a judge. And as you arrive and do your investigation, you find that this was not a situation where a player is cheating. It is not the same player in the sense of it is more like we are time travelers today, my L2 from New York, and we are in an alternative timeline. So it is an alternative player in an alternative timeline. Yes, very good, absolutely. So what are we seeing on our vote here? Well, gosh, it is almost the inverse mirror of last time. And I completely agree. There is very little disruption to going ahead and going back through the actions, putting the cryptic, reversing the draw if they went to their draw step with a random card, going ahead and putting that cryptic command back into their hand, going ahead and untapping all the creatures and going ahead and putting that Master of Ethereum back on the stack and beginning from there, because we all kind of understand, sure, they could choose some new modes with Cryptic Command. But if you got to play in Modern during the time that Affinity was a deck, you pretty much know taking 1 damage to their life total versus whatever was going to swing in on an equipped Ornithopter is is much less damage. So it is likely to play out exactly in the same way that we want. So I love the reasoning here, and I agree with everyone's answer. Now we're going to go to yet a third timeline. And our Scalding Tarn player finally fetches. Give them a hand, everyone. They learned from our 2 judge calls in our alternative timelines to fetch. And the active player goes fetch a mountain, all in sort of one activity. They go cast Through the Breach and Emrakul you. And here's what it looks like. And the non-active player, thank you so much, from Albany, New York. Applause for our player who's learned how to sack and find a mountain. Non-active player starts to sack 6 permanents, right? And lo and behold, there is a Cat King that they begin to put into their graveyard. And when they do so, they say, Judge! You come to the table, you do your investigation, you again find no cheating. And we ask the eternal question of back up or don't back up. So this is a very fun one. I will be. Oh, I am ever intrigued. We're getting okay. We've got some dissent this time. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and go back. So this is a card that non-active player sacks amongst amongst some other number. This is when they call you, and this is what the active player's board state looks like. Yeah, through the breach says you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste. Sacrifice that creature at the beginning of the next end step. Splice into Arcane 2 and 2 red. Well, that's an interesting question. I got a question from a judge I don't know where. They ask, does effectively the rules enforcement level matters a bunch here? I would love it if you'd be willing to type out more about how you feel the rules enforcement is particularly relevant. Did the active player have more mana to possibly pay? No, they do not have more mana. But I would also ask my L2 from RSC. I'm not sure what country that is. If you want to tell me the country, I'd love that too. Would that matter as well if they had more mana to pay? Because as I look at this card has something called a special action. Oh, thank you, Russian-speaking countries. That's fantastic. So this is a special action. It doesn't really use the stack. So unless they held priority when they fetched, there really is no other chance to pay this, is there? And I love it. My L3 from the UK, perhaps once again showing the wisdom that comes with L3hood, is asking the most interesting question of all, which is if we back up to where? And that is actually my follow-up question. Let's see. So we got a follow-up on the rules enforcement level. If it's regular, then there's not really anything disrupted by backing up. But if it's a higher level, then old boy missed it. I learned to play tournaments in oh yeah, absolutely. So I will say that this is one of these cases, and I just want to kind of go back to this board state for a moment. We're about to swing in with a 15/15 flying trample creature and have an opponent sacrifice 6 permanents. As errors go, this one feels pretty disruptive. In addition, if we continue from this point, with no backup, this player is also about to refresh their library, get a shuffle effect again. That doesn't matter too much, but I mean, it's at least noteworthy. There's a lot going on here, and in terms of this game getting a result that looks like Magic having been played correctly, this is pretty much game ending, even if they had 50 life, right? Because the opponent is now down all these permanents. And there's a reason they're playing this permanent, right? Like to get this advantage. Now, of course, ultimately, if you decide to leave it as is, it's on the players, right? The players need to be responsible for the game state. They're both responsible. Sure, that one player did a series of actions really, really fast, but still, this non-active player could have said, "Stop your search. Don't be slamming that Emrakul rule because you actually can't search, right?" And they could have called a judge sooner. They didn't call a judge until that moment. But I would likely back this up, and I would back this up to the point of the fetch activation. And when that fetch would resolve, they're not going to be able to search. So yeah, I'm also curious from our L3 in the UK. What are some other places you think people could back up to? Yeah, very good point. I'm saying back up to the activation, if you will, but with priority passed to the non-active player. Yeah, I have no problem. I would have no problem with letting non-active player respond here because if they did, it's going to allow active player to be able to pay that fee, and that would have been true if non-active player chose to do that. Now, I'm hoping in a good backup that non-active player isn't going to change their play pattern, right? And frankly, in this case, they're probably not incentivized to. But this is exactly why our UKL3 has exactly figured out why I included this scenario. Because it is a really good question. I mean, under no circumstances should we end up having our active player flying in with an Emrakul. There is definitely some good debates. Yeah, I also agree with what you're saying. At that point, then they just don't search, and we're fine, because we really do want to back up only to the error. I could see somebody saying, but the error happened before, and Matt, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be using first names, but my L3, I do want to point out, at least from the slide configuration, I was trying to explain that our Tarn searching player kind of did this all as one action and didn't really kind of follow the priority rules. So if you, as a floor judge, if anybody all my friends, judges and time travelers who are listening, came up to me and made a good argument for why you want to back up to either of those times, I would be comfortable with, I'm going to be comfortable with approving this backup, and I'm going to be comfortable with either one of those times. Okay, I'm just checking the chat room to make sure I'm not missing anything. Great. So we've got a question from our Albany, New York L1. When does the option to pay 2 for the search come into play? If anyone can look up in the comprehensive rules for me, the special actions, I'd love it if we can send that reference. The special actions don't use the stack, so they really kind of need to be paid. In this particular case, needs to be paid before the Scalding Tarn is activated, or if not, the player has to clearly say that they're holding priority with the Scalding Tarn trigger activated ability, I should say, on the stack. So there we go. Thank you for that from my New York L2. All right, making sure there aren't any other questions I missed. Ben or Klaus, if you see any questions I've missed, feel free to pipe in. Fetch in graveyard, yeah, I see, agreed. Yes, absolutely. Fetch is in the graveyard, no question about that. As far as, yep, why no on resolution? Again, I'm going to kind of listen to what the investigation shows. If the non-active player says, I felt kind of pushed through priority, and then I did things, I'd like to have priority with that on the stack, I'm going to at least entertain that. It makes me, in fact, less likely to want to back up if they say that. But if a floor judge came to me with that understanding, I would entertain it. I would at least have the conversation with the floor judge about why players are suggesting this one way or the other. Absolutely. Thank you for the Cat King reference there, our L1 from Uruguay. Okay, so let's see if there's another scenario for us. I'm quite certain there is. Here it is. Active player says attack with my Goyf. Oh, here we go. Oh, okay. Active player is at 3 life and says, how big is it? Active player says, there's 2 things in my yard. Non-active player says, I have nothing in mine, so no blocks, move to damage. Active player says, take 4, good game. Non-active player calls a judge. When you come over to do your investigation, the active player says to you, I absolutely knew my Goyfs were 4/5s, and I deliberately withheld that information. Here's my 2 things in my graveyard. Thoughts on this, friend? And I will also add the quiz. Back up, don't back up, but are there any other thoughts? Are there any other concerns about this? Okay, we've got a judge from France suggesting a CPV backup. We've got a number of backups. We've got Indonesia L2 saying CPV backup. So our UK judge says it's open information, but you can't lie about it. CPV. Okay. So when you use the phrase open information, what does that mean? That may be a language difference that I'm unfamiliar with, but I'm not familiar. I'm familiar with like 4 types of information: status, derived. Okay, so it's not lying. We have from Indonesia. This is an intentional misrepresentation. Absolutely it is. And let me ask you, my judge who said that, is that a problem? We've got This is an interesting claim. We have a claim from our judge in the UK that they can hand their graveyard but not lie. So that is interesting. When it is derived information, I can choose to say nothing, right? I can say figure it out yourself. Um, uh, so intentional misrepresentation is lying. Sure, in a colloquial sense. My question is it a violation of the rules? So our L3 from the UK is popping in. It is misrepresentation of derived information, or is it an accurate statement of the contents of the graveyard? Right, exactly. They and I would certainly apologize if some semantic choice I made on the word things either is maybe not translating universally to all languages, but my intent here is to have the active player having said true things, but things that were deliberately misleading. And while this may be kind of scummy, right, or it may be like non-sporting, it is not illegal. And so, in order to be cheating, we have to do three things, right? We have to break a rule, we have to knowingly break the rule, and we have to have at least had a chance of gaining um, advantage. Did this player seek to gain an advantage? Absolutely. They sought to do so. And then did they do so knowingly? Absolutely. What about condition number one? Did they break a rule? They did not. They did not break our communication policy. And because they didn't violate an infraction, we are not authorized to do a backup. Certainly, if there had been an infraction violation, like they said something like, "I have two card types in my graveyard," and even that's a little ambiguous. But if they said something like that, or certainly if they said the Goyf, is a certain power toughness, we would be perhaps making a very different decision. In fact, let's check in on that question ourselves. Active player in this do or not do scenario. Yes, I agree with our L2 from Italy here. Please don't DQ anyone for doing this. And if you do, please be ready to be humble and apologize. So active player attack goes attack with my two Goyfs. Non-active player who's at 4 life goes, how big is it? Active player says it's a 2/3. Non-active player goes, okay, push 1, move to damage. Active player goes, oh, yikes, it's a 4/5, and they call a judge. Now, before I move to the next slide, I just want to share some of the comments coming out. There's a feeling like it should still fall under unsporting conduct minor. That's, I would love to sit down with my Northeast US L1 judge, friend and time traveler, and kind of dig a little bit into the IPG, or maybe even encourage a reading of the annotated IPG on unsporting conduct, and see how you feel after a read through. And I'd love to hear your argument. Maybe we could talk about it. And then there's just some really good conversation. I won't review all of it, but we will move on to this question. I'll put up my backup or not quiz. So here we are. The person says, oh, it's a 4/5 judge. You come in and you do your investigation. You do not believe there's any cheating. So great. For those who need more information, feel free to simulate the investigation and ask me a question. Time permitting, we'll role play that. Yeah, that can be really surprising to players, as our L3 from the UK states. Sometimes it's legal to trick your opponents. And I know that there are definitely people who strongly believe that I'm going to take liberty and modify the language slightly, that it should be cheating. But I do find that with all the kind of philosophy guardians that we have, the conversations that I've had have firmly convinced me, at least, that it is not cheating. And that certainly as judges, if we feel strongly about things, one of the things that's cool is that Toby listens to us and will consider our positions. But they have a really unique 360-degree kind of worldview that informs a lot of how these decisions end up being taken. Okay, great. The rules enforcement level conversation has been sort of now settled with. At regular, derived information is free. So we have to answer completely as well as honestly. So a rewind under the jar could happen, although yeah, so that's really, I'm glad that we finally got to address that fully. So let's see what, I want to see where our votes are. So on this one, yeah, we've got 20 votes to back up, or really 19, and no dissenting votes. And I completely agree. In this case, we now have a communication policy violation. So given that we have a communication policy violation, and this was one of those different spaces, rather than going to the time of sort of the infraction or the error, we go back to when it was relied upon. So where would we want to rewind this? And let me show you our actions again. So what we had is non-active player asked how big it was. Active player said it was a 2-3. Non-active player said, okay, push one, and basically no blocks, right? Move to damage. Oh, it's really a 4-5 judge. So where do we want to back up this to? To when the original question was asked. I could certainly understand a judge who came to me on that. I really like the answer I just got in the chat room to the declare attackers step. And here's why. Because the push decision didn't rely upon the false information, but the not blocking did. So what I would like to do is move not to declare attackers, but to declare blockers. Now, there's one exception. What if away from the table, my non-active player says, well, I have an instant spell in my hand that could allow me to create 2 soldiers, 2/1/1 soldiers. And I really need to have those critters on the battlefield during declare attackers in order for them to be valid declare blockers, then this is the kind of stuff that would make me go there. And so yes, we're either going to be going to declare attackers or declare blockers, depending upon when this player actually relied upon it being a 2-3 and not being a 4-5. All right, so much great conversation happening in the chat room. We are at 38 minutes into the presentation. Let's go ahead and see if we have any more learn by doing or not doing, and we sure do. So active player casts accumulated knowledge. Non-active player says it resolves. In one action, active player puts it in the graveyard, draws 2 cards, and plays a land. Non-active player says, hey, the first AK, because there are no other ones in the graveyard, only draws 1 card, calls a judge. You find no cheating during your investigation. There are no other shuffle effects on the battlefield or in hand. Are we going to do a rewind here? Or a backup? Okay, I'm especially interested in those who are saying no, if you can share with me some of your reasons for no. We've got an answer coming out from a judge with the initial CG saying do a simple backup, HC. What is the simple backup? There we go. Our L2 from Russia has told us we're going to return that island to hand. If we're issuing the HCE here, we're going to go ahead and then recreate that set by returning that land and then do our HCE fix. And absolutely, if you came to me with this scenario, because you'd also come to me probably as your head judge if you wanted to do an HCE fix, we would do that. Now, here's one question I want to ask. What if during your investigation the player says, well, I thought the way the spell worked is that it goes to the graveyard as the last thing in casting a spell, and then I resolve the spell. So isn't it already in the graveyard? I believed it was already in the graveyard, and that's why I drew 2. Would anyone, upon hearing this, feel like it was a different infraction? And if so, kind of, can you tell me why? We've got a not really from our L2 from Brazil. It's still an HCE. They're just not getting DQ'd, says our L3 from the UK. Exactly. I mean, I love that answer. I do think, I do think that there's often this line between is something a GRV because, they really thought Brainstorm worked like Ponder, or is it HCE because we've done something, where we can no longer fix this with publicly available information. And I do agree with our L3 from the UK. I'm probably not going to be convinced that this was a game rules violation, but that would go very far for me. If I believed this players, and then in my investigation, I find out they're borrowing a deck they've never played Miracles before in Legacy. Okay, I'm absolutely persuaded that this is new information to them. So yeah, we'll return that land, do the HCE fix. Y'all are fantastic with your answers. I am super impressed with the collaboration taking place in the chat room and the answers coming from the floor. So let's role play getting a backup approved. And this is where I'm really eager to find, especially an L1 or a newer L2, but even more important than that, a really fast typer. So if that's you, you can be my floor judge in this scenario. And here is your scenario. Active player says, use a floating mana, cast Chromatic Star. Non-active player says, it resolves. Active player says, go to, and while thinking about going to combat, they go, judge, and call you over. So first off, I want to see who wants to be my floor judge. If so, type FL or FJ for floor judge. Here's the scenario. I forgot to pay for Dampening Sphere. Dampening Sphere should have made this Chromatic Star cost more. These are the lands that they have. The two are tapped. The power plant is not. And I will also put the quote up here. Here's the backup or not question, but I'm still looking for a floor judge if anyone wants to role play with me. It is not the first spell, which is why they had floating mana. They cast something else with 3 of their mana, probably probably that spell that you put mana into it and tap it and then destroy everything. The Oblivion Stone, let's say. They have 1 floating mana and they use that to cast the Chromatic Star. Ah, excellent point. So we have 2 different problems, don't we? Excellent job, everyone. Excellent. You have well, even though we didn't get to role play, you all have found the interesting challenge. The interesting challenge here is, if we're going to rewind, where are we really going to rewind to, right? The first mistake made was tapping Urza's Mine for extra mana. Dampening Sphere doesn't do that, does it? Right. So seeing that we don't really have anyone who wants to role play with me, I'll role play with myself. So and especially with the accurate understanding. Head judge, I'd like to do a rewind. Here's the scenario. We've got a Dampening Sphere that both of the players forgot about. We've got a player on Tron. They tapped their Mine and Tower, cast something, something for 4 mana, a Karn, I guess. Karn, Great Liberated. And then with their floating mana, they cast Chromatic Star. That's when they noticed, after Chromatic Star resolved, they noticed they forgot to pay for Dampening Sphere. But what they also forgot was that these lands don't really tap for that much mana. So I would like to rewind this back to the original activation of mana, go to their first main phase, returning the Chromatic Star and the Karn to their hand, issuing a games rules violation on the part of the active player, and a failure to maintain game state for our non-active player. Now, if a floor judge came to me with that kind of understanding, I might have some dialogue, make sure nothing else was overlooked. But finding nothing else, I would absolutely and confidently approve this backup. And the reason I wanted to also role play it is especially for my L1s and L2s who are getting some of their first opportunities to do competitive rules enforcement judging. It would be really common for me to walk back with you and observe your implementing this backup. And I know for a lot of us, all of my friends, judges and time travelers out there, it can sometimes feel intimidating to have another judge, hopefully one that you respect, but just someone that you're working with, kind of watch as you are implementing an aspect of your judge protocol. And I really want to encourage everyone to find their little kind of centering activity. Uh-huh. Well, so we had a great question come up from one of our USL3s. How would you go about ruling out cheating in this one, even though the player called it on themselves? Um, yeah, because sometimes you might begin to see like nonverbal behaviors from an opponent that make you realize the jig is up, right? Um, I do want to say, like, expressly that this wasn't an investigations workshop, so it is a little outside of the framing, but I think we're doing okay on time. So the kinds of ways that one would want to go about confirming that this is not cheating is asking some really good questions to both players, some of them even separated. Like you might want to ask, when was Dampening Sphere cast? For example, one of the things I would ask myself is, have they changed their behavior and Dampening Sphere has been here for a while? We do see in this case, like this person just got Tron. So if they were on the play and this is turn 3 and they've played land, 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 and turn 2, player played Dampening Sphere, and they're just kind of rushing maybe because the clock is tight, I would be very much persuaded if I said, how long has Dampening Sphere been there? Oh, I just cast it. What game is this? Oh, this is game 2. This is the first game we've had Dampening Sphere. So I would be kind of asking myself the theory of the case of what would have to be true or not true in order for this to be either devious or innocent. And then I would try to ask questions that either confirmed or overturned those base assumptions. All right. So great. Feedback form is up and awesome. Yeah, no, I'm very appreciative that you asked the question. There's no problem from our L3s in the US and the UK and abroad having us go another level. But I did want to at least give kind of maybe a taste of what kinds of skills one could develop when doing their investigations. So if we're going to back up, we're going to back up to that first land activation. And I would be very, very thrilled with a player who did that. And to reinforce my last point, if I'm standing up and watching, take a moment to center yourself. Still be your best judge self. A team lead or a head judge is there simply because this is one of our more complicated tools, and we want to make sure that we set you up for success. And that's why we're there. Maybe to discuss it afterwards. It's not to put any undue pressure on you. All right, so here's a review of our objectives. Objective number 1 was to identify what a backup is and where it may be used. We found that it was used in 3 cases for a player infraction, 1 case for a judge error, and it's also authorized within the jar. We discussed case study examples and learned to back up or not with those examples. And then we role played getting a backup approved. And this is the time for your questions, and also the time that remains for objective number 4, an exploration of some other from the floor case studies that I wanted to bring everyone. I'm kind of going back through the chat room. If I have missed an important question that you have asked, please retype it. But I am trying to go back just to see if anything has been missed. Oh, so we had an interesting question. Would the dampening sphere really be a double GRV? I would just want to double read through the GRV language, but that does seem very likely. And I like the reasoning that you're bringing is that this is the person in control of the thing that has changed the rules of the game. Let's see. Right. Our L2 from the Netherlands is sort of also talking about the same investigation strategies. How long has this been out there? How have they handled other castings of spells? And then we have our L2 from Russia admitting to making this mistake often. Aha. Yeah. I like our UK L3 judge's example of something that would tick off the spidey sense that maybe there's something untoward going on here. Well, what's the largest backup you've ever approved? Okay, great. So as it turned out, when I was judging a PTQ at a Channel Fireball event back when they were Grand Prix events, this was very close to my becoming an L2. I had this was during that set with the oh yeah, so this was during Kaladesh block, where there was that angel that made servos, but then there was also that artifact that would bring back creatures from the graveyard and I think make them zombies or exile them and make tokens of them. So this was going on, and there was this really complicated attack that the players forgot that all the creatures had +1/+1 from that angel that was both an effect on an anthem effect as well as making the servos. So, or the counters could go on. And there was a number of things that took place before players realized that basically after the blocks were made, all of the other players' creatures, Angel of Invention is the one, yes, thank you. Basically all of their creatures that blocked should have been dead. While they did appear on the surface to have sufficient toughness, once the anthem effect was there, they should have died. And did a kind of a lengthy investigation to make sure where things were. It ended up being through effectively a pass go and then about to enter into combat in the next turn when they realized that that creature shouldn't be there to block. So we did a rewind through declare combat, some main phase casting spell, the random card going on the top to the draw, going back to the previous turn, getting a card back into a hand that was cast second main phase, and then kind of recreating the combat, and then moving forward from there. And what was really neat about this, and I'm so glad you asked me, is it was this was back in the day when there was Exemplar available, and the L3, who was the head judge of this PTQ, had really commented on how a lot of times as experienced L1s or new L2s, where we can be really quick not to want to back up. And that's good, right? Because that is the baseline position. But he was very impressed at the questions I had asked and the presentation that I had made to him about suggesting that I believe this could be a backup. And interestingly, he told me from a mentoring technique, one of his last questions to me was, well, what do you want to do? Right? He's the head judge in this case. It was a he. And in this case, the judge asked me, what do you want to do? And that was the final mentoring test. This judge wanted to see, would I argue for the position, or would I kind of fall back maybe in, either you could say a conservative position or maybe a fearful position and not want to back up. But I really believed that this game was substantially better in the correct place, because there were the potential for some graveyard shenanigans that really needed to be addressed. So I hope that answers my USL3 question, and I really appreciate the opportunity. We've got probably just enough time for one of my extra explorations here. But I do want to remind that there is a feedback form, and I do want your sharpest polish and your snappiest praise that you're willing to give. But I have always pre-authorized everyone for feedback. Applause is optional today, as always, but feel free to post applause reacts. And let's talk about the case of the No-Lected Company. This was a really fun. There was this was at a time where if the only error that had happened, you could do partial fixes, but it was before it was expressly stated that you could do it just with a creature that was supposed to have died. That was a clarification that came out later in the rules, but that's a really good point that you're making. So here was the case of the No-Lected Company. A player was on some elves combo thing with Collected Company. They cast Collected Company, and they hit nothing. They whiffed. A couple moments later, when they're thinking about their attack, they go, oh, you had a Thalia out. I was supposed to pay for Thalia. And judge took the call, accurately saw that this was either a leave it alone scenario or a rewind. But do we want to consider the game state or the outcome of random events when we decide how we're going to rule on policy? What would have happened if this person had hit their combo off of that illegally casted Collected Company, right? That would be some tremendous advantage for them to get. But if we rewind, where they whiffed, there's also this possibility of tremendous advantage to be gained, right? A spell that had whiffed now goes nowhere. So this is a really interesting conundrum in terms of the rewind or not. And with your 2 minutes remaining, I'll tell you what happened. Players were very honorable here. The player who casted Collected Company was like, I don't feel comfortable with a rewind. It's potentially giving me too much advantage. But I have this elvish archdruid on the battlefield, and it's the only elf I have, but it can tap for 1 mana. What I'd like to do is just tap that mana. Now, how many judges, friends, and time travelers know that that would be a deviation? That would be a deviation to just go ahead and tap a critter to correctly pay for a spell after it had resolved. That is not, from my reading of policy, one of the tools that I have in the case of a GRV. That's not one of our partial fixes. So players came to this on their own. And because of that, the judge asked if we could do a deviation here. I clarified very, very deeply that the players were in agreement with that fix and comfortable with that fix. I let them know that this was a deviation, that they would, what the regular ruling would be, and that they would not be able to rely on this with future judges. But we went ahead and deviated here, and I was very impressed with the quality of the players and the sense of fair play that they embodied with this solution that they came up with. And fortunately, when players do come up with a solution, either before needing us at all, and sometimes while we're there at the table, we do have that ability to take those considerations into play. And so I thought that was a fun little story. And with that, I will hand the mic over to my sphere leaders and Ben.
Thank you very much. You would have had some extra minutes, so if for any question whatsoever, they can still be asked. There is no stress about that. First of all, thank you very much for holding this awesome presentation. I think all of us learned something, and I need to say we had a quite full room. I will post again the feedback form if you would be so kind um, to give feedback for Mark. We'll have a small debrief after this. And also, in the next day, we're going to release the schedule for week 3 that you can also apply for next seminars. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending. Hopefully, see you at one of the next seminars. And you can still ask questions. And we're going to clean up the room in about half an hour to an hour. So until then, please feel free to use the text chat. Thank you very much.
As stated, I will be back in a moment if you want to chat with me directly. I'm just going to go hang out with my sphere leaders and support team and find out the lovely things that you've all had to say. Thank you so much.